everyone. How you doing? We're back here with another session, and this is a topic and a guest, and I'm super excited to have on the show because I think based on the feedback and conversations I'm having with educators, and I'm sure Michelle, who is our guest, will be able to probably connect and agree with, as well as many educators are trying to figure out how to make sense of this. I'm going to call it a new territory. I know these concepts aren't necessarily new, whether we're being asked to teach hybrid or we're asked to be teaching online, or in some cases, some of you are being asked to do both. I think we get the concepts behind this, but we're not always quite sure how to do that. So I'm super excited to have Michele Eaton on the show today. And before we actually dive into that content, I'm already getting ahead of myself here. Michele, I want to make sure you have an opportunity to introduce who you are so they know your work, your background, kind of what you do, in case they don't know who you are. And if they don't, then obviously this is another wonderful opportunity to add an amazing person to their PLN. So Michele, could you introduce yourself here before we dive into the awesome topic for today?
Sure. So hi, thank you for having me. I am Michele Eaton. I'm the Director of Virtual and Blended Learning for a school district in Indianapolis. So my current role is that I oversee online course design and professional learning for our online high school, and then all of the blended initiatives around the district. So I've been doing that for about 9 years before it was cool to do online and blended learning. And so now it's definitely shifted some now that we're all doing that. So that's my role. I'm a former second grade teacher. So I came from an elementary background, and now I work at K-12. And I also am a new author. So I just recently wrote a book on blended learning that was released this summer called The Perfect Blend. Look at that. Yeah, so that's me in a nutshell.
Yeah, awesome. And so I think it's important so for a lot of educators to know that you're not just a talking head. This is actually like what you do for a living and working and you're living and breathing in these worlds, which I think is really important for a lot of educators, because I think it's sometimes there's lots of people right now trying to tell people how to do stuff that have never had to do this work before. And so it's really great to have you on the show there. And you said you've been doing this before it was cool, and I was trying to frame up the context for this, and I was looking at it from the lens of, we talk about blended learning or learning stations, or we want to call it flipped learning, or insert the word here that whatever people gravitated to, and that was back, I think, when it was nice to do, and now here we are in a world where it is necessity, it is a need that we need to do these things. And so as you've been working with people, what have you found that's helped people kind of get started in this? Because I think the majority of people, if we say blended learning, if we talk about learning stations and we talk about these types of things, teachers are going to nod their head and say yes. Whether they fully grasp it all or not is whatever. But I think people go, I get it. I know what those things are. But what have you been seeing that's been helping people now that it's like, oh my gosh, I actually have to learn this and I have to do this, and what I've been doing isn't working in these new virtual environments? What have been some of those first steps that you found for them to go, people are having success with this?
So a couple of things. I think one of the challenges is that we're all going back in different contexts, and then we also know that we're going to probably be shifting throughout the school year what learning looks like, what that environment is. But the reality is, no matter how you are currently teaching, whether it's remote, fully in person, hybrid, if you're teaching students at home and in person at the same time, we face similar challenges. And I think if we think first about addressing those challenges, so first of all, being we all have to be able to teach online and face-to-face this year. That's a reality. We have to be able to move fluidly between those models with minimizing the disruption. There's obviously a certain amount of disruption that happens when we change environments. But then finally, regardless of the context in which you are teaching right now, how we collaborate and connect with students shifts, whether that's because we're physically distant or socially distant within the classroom. And so blended learning, becomes the thing that makes that feasible. But when we start to think about all of those shifts and we start to think about teaching online and teaching face-to-face, it feels like separate jobs. And for a lot of folks, this thought of, I'm teaching face-to-face and kids that are quarantined at home remotely or I have a hybrid model where I have some kids face-to-face, and I'm supposed to also be teaching kids that are home online, that almost feels insurmountable because if we think about it as separate jobs. And so I think the first thing that can be really helpful is to think more holistically about live instruction and on-demand instruction. I'm trying really hard to get away from the term synchronous and asynchronous. I think we're all sick of hearing it.
I think it's make a lot of educators throw up in their mouth with these terms,
Right, exactly. So let's use new ones until we're sick of these and we'll find something else. But so if we think holistically about, what is it, knowing that you have limited time live with students, regardless, even if your students are physically all back, we need to provide some of those asynchronous, those digital lessons so that they have the ability to connect with each other, so that they are ready if we need to go remote, that, this isn't the first time they've been introduced to it. So regardless of the context, we have limited amount of time live. And so when I'm thinking about what I'm teaching live, I'm not thinking about what I'm teaching live if I'm home and online. I'm not thinking about it, separately from when I'm teaching face-to-face. I think about my content and what I'm teaching and what is the thing that only humans can do. If I only have 40% of the time with my students in our district, we're secondary teachers. They're at school 2 days and students are at home 3 days. So it's a hybrid. That's 40% of your time with kids that you have live. What's the most important 40% of your job that you can't do if you're not face to face? And so that's what I'm going to make live. And so when we think about that, it's generally not lecturing. It's differentiating. It's small group instruction. It's the personal connection, the SEL work that we do with students. I'm going to prioritize that for my live time. And it's going to be live if I'm face to face, and it's going to be live if we go remote. The environment's going to change, but that instruction is going to stay the same. And then I'm going to leverage digital lessons. I'm going to leverage technology to do what technology does well. And I'm going to design digital lessons that can help to essentially clone myself to allow students to learn for instruction to be happening in a flexible space. So an example of this is actually just recently talking with a French teacher at one of our high schools. And he was saying that, really thinking about it like that, he said, I'm not teaching grammar live. When I think about the most important role for me in my French classroom, it's speaking and listening activities. And so the other thing is he's designing these great digital lessons, and he's like, kids are learning and they don't need me physically there. And I'm having a greater impact with the speaking and listening activities. And he said, he was like, I don't think I'm going to change this when we do get back to normal. He's like, this is working. I think my kids are going to learn more, even within the constraints of this pandemic. And so I think really thinking about that is important. And that looks different for every teacher. I wish there was a recipe to follow, but like what works for that French teacher may not work for a math teacher because just the way your content works, and what works for an art teacher would be totally different. So it's really, I think, stopping and reflecting on that and prioritizing, optimizing your time live is critical. And then as we go to design those digital lessons, that's a pretty daunting task, because we don't learn the same online as we do face to face. And it would be great if we all had formal training and years of practice, and we weren't just thrown in to build this airplane while it's in the air. And so there are a lot of things to consider, but I think if you were to have the biggest impact, like the one thing I can do and to have a big impact immediately, I think that's to think really critically about interaction. So when I am designing a digital lesson, or I'm taking a look at an online lesson, I look for 3 kinds of interaction. And if those 3 kinds of interaction are there, regardless of anything else, we know we're going to have an active experience. And so that's student-to-student interaction, student-to-teacher interaction, and student-to-content interaction. So I'm going to create an opportunity at some point in the digital lesson for students to connect with each other. And this doesn't have to be fancy. This could be in a Google document. You just create a table and have students contributing to a row in the table, or it's using a Flipgrid or a Padlet wall. But I'm going to have a chance for students to connect with each other. So critical, especially now. I mean, it's critical for good online learning. But right now, like, we need to be so intentional about creating opportunities for students to connect. The student to teacher interaction. So is my presence there in the digital lesson? Am I leaving feedback? Am I involved in the discussions? That is beneficial for a lot of reasons. There's some significant research out there about even academic integrity online. We have this big fear that as soon as we move online, kids, like, cheating is going to become rampant. And the reality is, the research tells us that cheating online has less to do with the environment in which it happens and has everything to do with teacher proximity. And it's exactly the same face-to-face. So if you think about it in a face-to-face classroom, and you have kids working on a learning activity, they are more likely to cheat if you are sitting at your desk checking your email than if you're up walking around the room. Your proximity to the learning impacts the academic dishonesty or honesty within the classroom. It doesn't prevent it completely, but it has less to do with the environment. It doesn't have anything to do with the fact that students are physically close to each other and can whisper and tell answers. It has nothing to do with the materials they have available to them to write a note on a piece of paper and hand it over. It's the teacher's proximity to the learning. Online, that's not a physical proximity. So it's more perceived presence. So little things like having your face in the video, that creates a presence with the material than using something that you just find on YouTube. Participating in discussion, replying in comments, leaving feedback when you go to grade, like, those things all impact your proximity to the learning, which impacts cheating. Has a much bigger impact than the environment itself, just because they're able to Google something. So anyway, I'm chasing a rabbit there, but looking for that. And then the third piece is student to content interaction. So creating opportunities for students to actively engage with content. And that doesn't have to be fancy either. There are interactive materials and websites and resources you can use, but even thinking about, if I want students to watch this video, what are they going to do with it? Creating some sort of metacognitive activity after. I like one simple strategy, I think that's a quick win, is for any kind of reading, copy pasting. And I got this from Devin Hess. He works at UC Berkeley, but he suggests copy pasting a text into a Google document or the Microsoft equivalent. And then you can build in, closed reading prompts or a task for students to do. If you think about it, those are free annotation tools you have built in. Students can highlight, they can comment, you can add in text boxes and have them stop and reflect. So you can make it a much more active experience than if they were just reading it from a website or from a PDF. So that's one of those quick wins. But ultimately, I think as you're designing, if that is your lens, how can I create interactivity in those three ways? Even if you don't feel really strong at, like, the design portion, you're going to have a big impact there.
I love that. And I'm so glad you brought up those three types of interaction. It was actually, that was like my next segue question, and you brought it right in. So even on an early Monday morning, our brains are on the same page. And I think you hit some really critical elements there that I think are really vital for educators that are trying to grapple with this. I mean, one, I think going all the way back to the beginning there, where you talked about seeing this cohesively, not as I've got this job and this job, but it's one collective job. And yes, you might have to do some differentiation, but we've been tasked with that for years. That's nothing new. And even the word differentiation, I know sometimes gets people upset. Like, just use your professional judgment. You know how to meet kids' needs. But as you talk about those interactions, I think that's what's really vital for a lot of educators. And I remember I listened to a podcast, the On Education, that you were on, and I'll definitely link that as a resource. And you talked about that, and that really gravitated to, I think it breaks it down into simple things. As we are planning these lessons, whether it is in a hybrid or online, like, where is the interaction for student to student? And I'm looking at my own children, my children are in a hybrid approach here as well. And even my youngest, like, just the need to connect with her friends, whether it's school or not school related, and we've tried out some different apps and things that in normal year we probably never would have allowed, but it's so vital for, I think, for their well-being. And whether that's just even for us as teaching, building those interactions in yes, for learning, but also to kind of, as best we can, replicate some of the face-to-face interaction that just naturally happen in a classroom or in a hallway, and nothing's ever going to be the same, but there's opportunities there. And the same thing with the student to teacher interaction. And one of the biggest things that I see another, I'm going to call it a concern that a lot of teachers have, that I think this really can help with this. Teachers are struggling with the idea of building relations, especially in the 100% online, where the kids aren't required to put their cameras on. And we know that you shouldn't force that. There's lots of reasons with equity and respect and privacy. Sometimes the kids don't even have to join the session as long as they're getting the work done. You may never actually speak or see the student, but they're still doing the work. I mean, I know every district's got different regulations, but I think that interaction, that student to teacher, and building those things in through lesson development is going to help you then build the relationships that you're trying to strive for, that maybe you're struggling with. And as a result, yes, it's going to take time. Those relations will start to come around, and those kids will maybe start to join some sessions and speak. And to me, I think that is one of the things that I started when you were talking, that I think where a lot of people can really help figure out the classroom relationship piece, that you could do that in a face-to-face environment easier because the kids are in your 4-cylinder classroom walls, for X amount of minutes every day. And now they don't necessarily even have to attend a session. And I think that is kind of like a double win if you really start to intentionally build that in. And then obviously the content, because that's our goal with that. And so, as you think about that, and I think about that, as people then are starting to think about the designing of their lessons, do you start with the first question you said of, what is the most vital, what is my role as an educator, like what's the most important aspect of that for the live session, and then you build out, in the hybrid, or if you're online, outside of that, do you start with the 3 interactions and then figure out which one's best to deliver live? Like, how are people managing that? Because I think they're simple tasks. I think they're very helpful for people framing their lessons, but it's also, I think a lot of times now it's also like, okay, so what is the first step, Michelle? How do I, and I know everybody thinks different, but I think that's like, that first step is always like, if I can get there, the dominoes tend to fall into place.
I think the first step is to determine your live and your asynchronous plan.
Okay.
So thinking about, and what that might mean, I think, so if we stop and reflect, what's the key role for me as a person in this classroom with students, and we start there. For a lot of us, that's going to be, the differentiation piece, the remediation, like taking data, what we know about what students know, and then helping get them to competency, to a level of mastery. For some, like that French teacher, it's the speaking, it's the connecting in that way. What I think for the majority of us, what we're going to find is whole group direct instruction probably isn't the most vital role for us as teachers in our classroom. It is an important part of teaching, but I think as soon as we can fully believe and buy into this idea that asynchronous learning is just as much teaching and instruction as what we do live, then we can split that. So I think we make that plan. And for a lot of us, what that might mean is that the foundation of the learning happens in those digital lessons. I'm finding that for a lot of teachers right now, that is kind of the starting place, that whole group instruction that we're all going to get. I'm going to design that in a digital lesson. I'm going to design it so that I can get data about what students know. And then I'm going to take my limited time with students to take that data and make artful decisions to help them meet proficiency. So I think that's the first step. And then we can start building and designing. And I also think, so kind of backtracking a little bit to what you were saying about the building relationships piece and thinking about that in our design. I love online and blended learning. I've loved it before we were all forced to do it. And one of the really powerful things about it is that it can be so individualized. When we start to give students more flexibility in their learning, and that's so much easier to do with, digital lessons that allow students to move through at their own pace, learning becomes so individualized, and those interactions are, have moved now to one-on-one. So while in some ways it is easier to build relationships face-to-face, for some of your kids that were good at, blending into the background, at sitting there quiet, this could be a better way for you to build relationships with students. And we have to think about, we have to hold on to all of those positive things. I think that's one of those things that I hope we really find this year that we can take with us. And there are little things you can do throughout your academic content, throughout your lessons online, to help start those relationships. So I think building in quick reflection or metacognitive activities into your digital lessons are a way to get a pulse on learning for all of your students. But then it's a spark, it's a starter for conversation. So what I mean by that, just quick check activities. It's important for I could ramble on about this forever. There's a lot of research that supports specifically in an online environment, stopping students and having them process information to think about their thinking regularly. But you can quickly, having a student do a one-sentence summary of what they just read or what they just watched, having them share, after they go through some material, share the muddiest point. That's one of my favorites. What's the thing that's, most abstract for you right now, or that you're still not quite grasping? You can get that really quickly through a quick assignment they submit. You could do this on a Padlet wall. It doesn't have to take a lot of time, these quick checks, but then you get an idea, you get some data regularly throughout your digital lesson about what students know, what they don't know. It's an actionable thing for you as the teacher. So you ask those, muddiest point questions regularly. That's information you get that you can now reach out, individualized instruction for a student who in your face-to-face class maybe would have just sat there quietly and been a little confused about something. So I think there are things we can do built into our digital lessons that are low effort for the teacher, but build that connection between the teacher and the student around their learning that I think can be really, really powerful.
Yeah, and you said this now a couple times, and I want to make sure that we get this highlighted and captured, because in a lot of the scenarios that you've been sharing so far, they're simple in design, they're simple in use. You're talking about a one-sentence summary, you're talking about just a spreadsheet where a kid can check in. And I think there is this pressure. Whether you're an educator that looks at things on social media, or even just through the pressure that you put on yourself, that all the things we create have to be these magnificent, glorious graphic design interfaces that are, beautiful and eye-catching. And there's nothing wrong with those. I'm not putting that down. But I think when we get to the heart of the matter and we think about our time, we think about our energy, I look about my wife, who's an educator, and educators I'm working with, and how quickly they're already almost to the burnout point. And we're in Iowa, we're entering our fourth week of schools. I have a real fear that we have to strip all that stuff down. And especially when we don't really get to see kids face to face and online can be powerful learning. I think I know you believe that. This is not a Band-Aid approach. I wholeheartedly believe this is the mode of operation going forward, being that as districts, you're not putting these plans in hoping that everything returns back to 100% face to face. Obviously we want to get back to that structure. But there are plenty of students and families that are experiencing this online approach for the first time, that are going, this works really well for us. This works really well for my student. It works really well for whatever the reasons. And it's not going away. It's going to obviously, like everything that we keep saying, it's going to look different. But this option of learning, I think a lot of districts, you're going to have to be prepared to continue to offer that. Or attendance and enrollment and things could shift. And it's not to get into all those politics, but I think to get back to what I really want to emphasize is keep it simple. make it, a Google form or a Microsoft form that's literally one question, put it on a Padlet. Like it doesn't have to be complex. And I know even in this series, for those that are part of this PD, we are going to explore some tools, but we're exploring the tools with, is it actually worth your time? Does it actually solve the problem? Because there's so much at our fingertips now. Like there is 700 tools to do everything.
Mm-hmm.
And while that's great, it's also overwhelming. So I'm glad you brought that up, because I know that we build as educators a pressure on ourselves that everything has to be perfect, and simple can also be perfect.
Exactly. I think that's important to note too, that not only is keeping it simple, like when I tell folks when they're creating an online learning, simplifying is so important, especially when you have remote learners. Things can take a little bit longer. It is harder to walk someone step by step through how to use a new tool remotely. But when I say that, it's not just to like, oh, give yourself some grace under a lot of stress, keep it simple. Like if you keep it simple, it's what's going to be best for kids. And I think people are often surprised to hear this from me specifically. But in my role supporting teachers, you learn all the web tools, you learn how to help people, and you go through and you troubleshoot. I know about tons and tons of online tools that you could use. But when it comes down to me, the things that I use when I am designing any sort of online lesson, whether it's for adults or for kids, I use 5 things. My online toolbox has 5 tools in it, and that's it. And I use them I know those tools really well, and I use them in unique ways so that, varying the learning, it's not the same thing over and over again. But I'm not introducing a bunch of new tools just because it's the new shiny thing that I saw the teacher next door using. And that's easier for kids, because once we learn how to use this one tool, then I don't spend any more time learning the technology. I can jump right into learning. It's less pressure on me because I can find the tools that I like, that I can do lots of things with across multiple content areas. And, they check these boxes for me, and then I don't have to stress out about a bunch of other things. I think that's one of the biggest stressors, because everybody is doing this now. We're all moving things online, and everybody has found that thing that works really well for them, that they're excited about. And so, which is exciting. But I think as a teacher, especially one who maybe this is new territory for you, you hear, even within your own building, teachers using all these different tools. Even if they're just using a couple, you feel this pressure, like I have to learn how to use all of these things too. And I think that's an important message to send, that like the things you're using might be different than the person next door to you, but think about the tasks you need to accomplish. So for me, and I don't know if this is helpful to anyone, but 90% of everything I do is using my learning management system and using our G Suite, using Google. If I can accomplish a task, and I'm thinking first, like, what is it I want students to be able to do, and not so much like I want to use this tool. How can I shove it into this lesson? If I can do it using the features within the learning platform and Google Docs or Google Slides or Google Forms, then those are the tools I'm using. Even if there's a flashier, cooler, trendier tool out there that can accomplish it, maybe even with some more bells and whistles, if I can get the job done there, I'm going to do it there, because it's simple for me. Those are tools I know. It's simple for the students. It's all in one place. Then I have the other 3 tools I use are complementing the things I can't do in that platform. So like I use Padlet because it doesn't require a login. So as a former 2nd grade teacher, that's really important to me. And I can do a lot of things, and I can use it a lot of ways. Flipgrid, because I think one thing we often forget about when we're designing online is the importance of language-rich content experiences. Absolutely necessary for our early learners, our emerging readers, absolutely necessary for our English learners, just absolutely necessary for everybody. We think about traditional classroom instruction, back 12 years ago in 2019 when we're teaching, we talked all the time in class. We talked with our kids. We spoke to them. They had a chance to speak back, and then we design online and everything is silent. everything is text-based. And so Flipgrid is an easy tool. I think it's easy. It didn't take me very long to learn, and it's built around getting kids talking. So I like that one. And then I like Edpuzzle because I like having a way to make video an active experience, and that's something I couldn't do with those other tools. And then that's it. And I don't, and I'm not trying. I just use those over and over again. And I don't feel this pressure. Like I didn't feel the pressure this year to create a Bitmoji classroom because everybody was doing it. Like I have my toolbox, and this is what's in my toolbox. So
Yeah, I love
hopefully
it.
that help everyone breathe a little bit. Like that is absolutely okay. And actually, if your toolbox is small, you're probably doing exactly what you should be doing as an expert in online
Yeah.
learning.
Well, and you know, as we think about this and kind of wrapping this up here too, I think what you talk about there is then we're spending more time on what matters. I think about going back to your 3 interactions that you talked about. We're also spending, you know, from the pressure of standards and academics and all that, it gives you more time to troubleshoot the content and the kids' understanding of the standards versus troubleshooting like what button do I click, how do I do the tech, and you know it's always a balancing act, and we know that we sometimes, for a lot of us, you might still be testing out a couple different tools to figure out what is going to be in your toolbox. And I
Mm-hmm.
think giving yourself permission to do that as well is important, because for a lot of people, they've been asked to teach online for the first time ever. And I know we had the spring, but I also view that as like a blur of that was emergency mode. That wasn't truly
Mm-hmm.
online teaching. And while we did figure a lot of things out, it was our emotions and everything was just at a different state, where now I think people are really kind of lasered in going, what is actually going to work, where I think before it was survival. And so this gives you that opportunity, I think, to try some things, but you don't need to try 100 of them. And once you've got
Mm-hmm.
your toolbox, you know, for you, it's your
Mm-hmm.
Edpuzzle, your Flipgrid, which are all amazing tools. You know, run with it.
Right. I think a quick strategy that's not going to take it's not going to take a lot of effort for you as a teacher that you could start implementing that I think would have a big impact as you're figuring things out, is to ask your kids. And even at the end of the week, if it's a quick form, asking them what worked for them, what they liked, or what is it that they are missing? What is it that they don't, you know, what is it they're missing in these online lessons that, and what are their ideas for improving it? Your learners are your key consumers of this thing that you're creating, will have a lot of valuable insight for you. And I think that's beneficial in more than one way. Your kids are going to be able to tell you what works and what doesn't. They're going to give you ideas that will make your job easier, one. And then two, the other thing that we're seeing, I mean, we're starting week 5, so we've been in a similar amount of time in school. And the thing that we're hearing a lot is we're worried about starting to lose kids. So kids that aren't showing up, that aren't doing the online work.
Yeah.
You know, how do I engage those kids when they're not face to face with me, where it's like forced compliance when they have some choices and they're not choosing to come in. I think that's a big question. I think there are a lot of things to think about when we're thinking about student engagement, but the simple asking kids to give you feedback, that can create so much just natural buy-in, because not only can they help your job, make your job a little bit easier, but imagine from a student's perspective when they realize that not only does their opinion matter, but it actively influences the trajectory of their learning and what learning looks like for them. That's engagement that is so much more meaningful than thinking about how can I create this entertaining lesson for students. And that's gonna bring them to the table or to their computer. So I think that's something that I would recommend starting this week. So at least once this week, stop and ask kids to give you feedback, and then use that feedback.
Yeah. And I think, you know, as you're talking, I was writing down, like, I think that actually ends up being the challenge for this learning is to let's get that feedback and let's, you know, and even then let's start to design your toolbox. You know, what is that going to look like for you? And starting with the students. And I think, you know, if we can start that now and as we continue, you know, it's a good little kind of formative for ourselves as educators as well. And like, where are we a month from now, and what's working and not working with kids? Because as they continue to get all the bells and whistles from, all their teachers and figure out their routines, things are gonna change too, because I think we're all adjusting on the fly. And so I think that's a good little next step, as well as I think, another challenge for a lot of teachers is thinking about those 3 interactions, thinking about the live and the on-demand sessions, and how to tweak your approach to creating content. So I think we're going to have lots of choice. I'm going to have to create like a choice board here, I think, of some
Perfect.
challenges, which is exactly what we want. And so, Michele, this has been absolutely phenomenal. As we wrap this up, just so people know in the PD and the resources, we're going to have a link definitely to your book. So if you are interested, definitely in Michele's work, there's a ton of examples and templates and resources within the Perfect Blend, if you want to dive deep into that. But the last little thing here, Michele, that I would love to end on is, we know there's a lot on everybody's plate. We know that there's stress and there's unknowns and all the things everyone keeps talking about all the time. Maybe I should use the word unprecedented. Maybe I shouldn't use that word. But
So anybody got their bingo cards out right
yeah,
now?
there we go, bingo. But one of the things that I've heard you share time and time again through podcasts and videos and other things is you really see this, and I do too, it truly is, through a lot of the unknown, a wonderful opportunity for us to improve and really take a deep reflection on what did work in our face-to-face. And I think some of us are realizing some of those things that we thought were successful maybe could be better now that we have to move to hybrid and online. And I think to really stay as positive as we can, I know easier said than done. You've been doing this work for a long time, you know it works. And I just think as a reminder for all of us, like, this is a wonderful opportunity to get better at our craft, help students in different ways to see what works. So whatever the future holds, we are going to be better equipped to handle anything that's coming our way.
Absolutely. This is a great opportunity to throw out the things that we knew weren't working. Like, kind of the expectation is at this point. So if there ever was fear of like, oh, I can't try this new thing because what if it doesn't work, and accountability, like you have this opportunity now to really go for it, to throw out what wasn't working. And of course, learning's gonna be better when we don't have the constraints of living through a global pandemic, certainly. But there are things that we are gonna do this year that we're not going to want to get rid of. And so as stressful as the weeks are and the days are, and as hard as it is to, no matter how far along in your career, to be a first year teacher all over again, like doing this thing that we're not really sure how to do, like look for those moments, look for those wins. And I think if we can, I think it'll be good for us to focus on the things that we're learning now that are not just for a pandemic, that this is going to improve learning moving forward. I'm excited. I'm excited to get past 2020, but I'm really excited I'm excited to see how, this changes education, even when things go back to, whatever normal is.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Michele, thank you so much for all your time. Definitely within the PD and the notes and everything, we'll have lots of the links for everything. But for those listening, if they want to learn more about you, follow up on your work, and definitely if you're not already part of their network of professionals they should be following, they need to. Where's the best place for them to get started to follow your journey and your learning?
Oh, I'm everywhere: Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, wherever you want to find me. We could probably link my handles there for you. But
Yep.
Yes, please connect. Shoot me a message. I'm always happy to talk about this kind of thing and to support in any way that I can. So I'd love for you all to reach out if you had questions or wanted to talk about anything.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Of course. Thank you.